You there, Ted?
I am. It's great to be with you, Glenn.
Good to be with you. How are you feeling?
I am feeling great. Obviously, the election results were not what we had hoped for. But I'll tell you, Heidi and I, we feel incredibly privileged to have had the chance to make this run, to be part of what was just an incredible grassroots movement. And, not a day goes by that we are not thankful for the men and women all across this country that we had the opportunity to meet and hug, and they're just patriots fighting for this country. And that was inspirational. We came up short in this election. I would have preferred it otherwise.
Me too.
The movement still continues, and that's what gives me encouragement.
Let's talk about that in two ways. First of all, can a conservative win happen with the media the way it is today? Facebook, we just found out a couple of days ago, Facebook, like for instance, dropped my speech from CPAC, dropped your speech from CPAC. They were manipulating what was trending if you were a conservative, and especially one that was for Ted Cruz. You know how Fox behaved. How can someone like you win when the media is the way it is? Can you?
Well, you can. Now, this election will be studied for the role of the media, and in particular network executives that they made in terms of promoting the candidate they had chosen they wanted to win. It's now, for example, Trump has received now over $3 billion in free airtime. Yeah. But strikingly, the last 30 days, he had $500 billion in free airtime, 90% of which was positive. To put that in perspective, in the entire 13 months of the campaign, the aggregate coverage of my campaign was about $500 billion worth. He got that in 30 days, and 90% of his was positive. And that has a dramatic impact on the polls when every network becomes effectively the super PAC for the candidate they want to win the nomination. And we're about to see that same ferocious fury now turned against Donald in an effort to elect Hillary. And there's no doubt we need to think hard about what is the role of a handful of network executives in manipulating and trying to deceive the voters, because I think it's a very dangerous dynamic we have right now.
So, Ted, we've got only about 8 minutes. I know you're on a tight schedule and we're on the network schedule. So I want to get some pretty important questions out. There are people now, we are getting hammered by two fronts. One, people saying, you got to convince Ted to run third party. And I keep saying I don't think he would do that. The other is, you've got to support Donald Trump, and we can't do that. What do the people that were for you, what do you think that we should do? What is your recommendation? And can you support Donald Trump?
Well, listen, this is a choice every voter is going to have to make. And I would note it's not a choice that we as the voters have to make today. The Republican convention isn't for another 2.5 months. The election isn't for another 6 months. You and I both want to support a conservative. We want to support someone who will get the burden of Washington off of small businesses and bring back jobs and economic growth. We want to support someone who will defend the Constitution, defend the Bill of Rights, religious liberty, the Second Amendment. We want to defend someone who will stand by our friends and allies, including especially the nation of Israel, and we want to defend someone who will be a strong, serious commander-in-chief. More broadly than that, Glenn, you and I both want to see a president we can trust with power, who demonstrates the temperament not to abuse that power. That's what elections are about. The voters in the primary seem to have made a choice, and we'll see what happens as the months go forward. But I think we need to watch and see what the candidates say and do.
Now, you say we need to watch and see. Ted, are you leaving the door open to if Nebraska were to somehow
it's not going to happen,
miraculously choose you tonight?
Pat's going for the Hail Mary.
Is there, I mean, if that happened, would you consider getting back in the race?
Well, I am not holding my breath. My assumption is that will not happen. But listen, let's be very clear. If there is a path to victory We launched this campaign intending to win. The reason we suspended the race last week is with Indiana's loss, I didn't see a viable path to victory. If that changes, we will certainly respond accordingly.
I don't know about you, Nebraska, but I take that as a yes.
I take that as a big yes.
Get to the polls
now,
and vote for Ted
I
Cruz.
want you to know, the minute you would unsuspend your campaign, John Kasich would do the exact same thing.
I bet he would, too.
I bet he would. That's interesting, Ted. That's interesting.
Interesting.
That's very interesting.
It's very, very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
I like that.
Can I ask you this?
I will say, Glenn,
Yeah.
a lot of folks in the media are trying to spin this election result as the death of the conservative movement. And that's a media narrative that the media loves, but also a lot of the Washington establishment loves.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, I think it's complete nonsense. I think the conservative movement remains strong and vibrant. I think the conservative movement, unfortunately, was divided. That doesn't mean it lacks its potency, but it is true that when conservatives are divided, we are far less effective. And there are a lot of reasons for that.
So that brings us to what the GOP is saying. 2 weeks ago, Ted, Reince Priebus wanted to spend the day with us and spend the day, do television, do radio, and then have some conversations off air because he was courting our listeners. Since you dropped out, the guy won't even return our phone calls. This is the week it was supposed to happen. He was going to do Hannity, us, and Rush Limbaugh. Yesterday was Hannity. Now he's saying we never planned on coming down. I mean, it's incredible what's happened. And so how do we get behind a group of people who don't have any interest in asking conservatives for their vote?
Well, I hope that proves not the case. And, from my perspective, this fight was about a lot more than one campaign or one candidate. This fight is about principles that are eternal. The free market principles that built America, that allowed millions of small businesses to lift hundreds of millions out of poverty into prosperity, those principles are as true today as they were every day of our country's history. The constitutional liberties and the Bill of Rights that protect our God-given rights from being violated by the federal government, those rights are true and as valid today as they have been throughout history. And so the movement continues. What my energy is directed at, what my focus is directed at, is continuing to strengthen and speak for that movement to all of the grassroots activists, the over 7 million people across the country who voted for me, allowing us to win 12 states across the country. This fight will continue because the country is worth it. And whether those in Washington will listen in the short term, that will be their choice. But I think the answer, the only force strong enough to change the path we're on is the grassroots. And so my energy and focus is going to remain where it always has been, working to listen to the people and to fight for the people each and every day.
Ted, looking back at Barack Obama in 2008, he comes along, he has this big victory. Everyone predicts the end of the Republican Party, the end of the conservative movement. It's just going to be a regional party from now on. 2 years later, you have the Tea Party wave election. So that's proved wrong. And it wasn't that Americans seemingly turned towards progressivism. They just really seemed to like Barack Obama. He was this guy who hit the right tones at the right time somehow. I didn't see it, but obviously America did at some level. Do you see that as the same way with Donald Trump, in that, like, it's not necessarily that the Republican Party is turning away from conservatism. They just see this guy as the right personality for this time?
Well, listen, there's no doubt about the power of celebrity. And by any measure, Donald Trump is a phenomenon. And it has been a phenomenon heavily fueled by media executives who have run him 24/7.
So,
and that is one of a kind.
So wait, Ted, is it, or has the Democratic Party that has the whole stable of celebrities looked at that and said, Well, then why don't we go for a Will Smith, Angelina Jolie ticket?
Look, that is entirely possible. You know, one of the disturbing things about this election, and there are many, is that it opens the door potentially for what comes next, and what comes next is not likely to be sound, stable leaders with good judgment and the understanding of the problems facing this country, our economy, and the challenges and threats facing us across the world. I'm still a little bit old-fashioned, and then I think we ought to be able to look up to our president. We ought to be able to be proud if our kids want to be like the president, and that's a test that, you know, many presidents, from JFK to FDR to Ronald Reagan, there were millions of kids who wanted to be like those presidents, and their parents were proud that that was the model they were emulating. I sure hope we don't move away from that to a system where you'd be less than proud if your kids said they wanted to be like the president.
So, Ted, I've only got 2 minutes left. When Marco Rubio left, he said he had a regret. A, do you have any regret? And B, where are you going next?
Well, look, my biggest regret is that we weren't able to accomplish the task, and that we let down the millions of grassroots activists across the country who fought so hard. Heidi and I and the girls, we poured everything into it we've got, but we weren't able to get it done. I wish we hadn't disappointed so many incredible people across the country. But, you know, where do I go next? I'm actually driving to the airport right now, flying to Washington to go back to the Senate. And the very same principles that I was fighting for to execute from the White House: jobs, freedom, security.
Do you
They're
believe
going to be happy to see you.
Do you? Yeah, they're going to love to see you.
Those are my priorities in the Senate.
Is there a possibility of a third party in the future of people that think like you?
I don't think that's very likely. It's always talked about. I don't know that it's something that's likely to happen. What I do think is imperative is that we actually get the job done. And the job is getting the burden of Washington off of small businesses so that we have wages going up again. We have jobs coming back to America. We have people having a chance again at the American dream. I mean, we are trapped in a stagnation, and people are hurting. And I'm very dismayed that the odds are increasing that we simply keep going down the same road. We don't fix those problems, and people end up hurting even more. And that's where my focus is going to be, is fighting for small businesses, fighting for the American worker, to get Washington off your back. And I believe we're going to accomplish that, but it just may take more time.
Ted, great to talk to you. We'll talk to you again, I'm sure, when you're in Washington. And what you're saying is, if Nebraska goes the right way, there's still a chance.
There's a chance.
You're saying there's a chance. All right. Thanks a lot, Ted. I appreciate it.
Thank you, gentlemen.
You bet. Bye-bye.